Forced from Earth 7 years ago, you've been living on the jump ship Ridback. You finally found a hospitable planet. Can you spread your influence and instill confidence in Beta Colony?
Welcome to Tantrum House Studio D. I'm Melissa Delp.
And I'm Kevin Delp. Beta Colony is a game for 2 to 4 players. It takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. It has area majority, it has dice rolling, and a rondel. Now, the designers Matt Riddle and Ben Pinchback called a roll-del mechanic.
This game is published by Rio Grande Games, and they sent us this copy to review.
Let's look at the components. There's a game board, player mats, cards, tiles, dice, spaceships, resources, meeples, and tokens.
The game is played over 9 rounds, and those are divided into 3 cycles. Players are going to be using their dice to move their ship around the track and then to also take actions. The goal is to have the most points. At the beginning of the game, players choose a color and take all the pieces. Each player also receives a random player board with individual powers. You set up the board with random cycle cards and pods. In reverse turn order, players choose a starting space on the roll-del.
At the beginning of a round, the start player rolls their dice, then all other players change their dice to match.
On your turn, you'll use 1 die to move your spaceship clockwise, and a different die to perform an action at that location. Then it's the next player's turn.
You'll get to use your last 2 dice once it gets back to your turn. You'll do the same thing. Use 1 to move your ship, and the other to perform another action.
At the end of the round, the start player marker goes to the next player, and you move the round marker.
You'll notice that the rounds are divided into 3 cycles. At the beginning of rounds 1, 4, and 7, the bonus activates based on what the card says, and at the ends of round 3, 6, and 9, you resolve the card's goals. Let's look at the actions you can do on your turn.
3 spots on the track allow you to gain certain types of resources. You'll collect the number of resources based on the value of the die you use. So if you used a 5 or 6, you take 2 goods. And if you use a specific color die, like red in Nebra, then you get a point.
You can get more fuel at Ridback. Fuel allows you to increase or decrease a die value.
There are 2 manufactories on the board. When your ship lands on one of them, you can use a die to select a colonization pod. But you have to pay for that pod with the matching colored resource. Then you immediately build that pod in one of the colonies, but you must pay another resource matching the color where you want to place your pod. For most pods, you add one of your colonists, but some require 2 colonists and others none.
After you place your pod, you see how much influence you receive. You count the number on the pod plus 1 for every pod of the same color it's connected to, but you can never have more than 3 pods of the same color next to each other. Also, you get a bonus influence if it's next to the colony center. You then move your token up the colony's influence track, that number of spaces, receiving any bonuses along the way. Many of the pods give you a bonus when you build them, like points, fuel, or artifacts. Artifacts can be used as a wild resource or as a payment for certain achievement cards.
When you visit the Nexus, you can use any die value to take a resource of your choice and a fuel. Or you could purchase a cultural achievement card. You need artifacts to buy the statues. Each one gives you endgame points for meeting different criteria. You use resources to buy the buildings. These have a set amount of points and often a one-time bonus.
So throughout the game, you're going to get points from using your specific color die on those action spots, from going up on the influence tracks, from building certain pods, and even from the cycle cards.
Now at the end of the game, you're going to get points from your achievement cards and then any extra artifacts that you still have. There's also the majority scoring in the colonies.
You'll score each colony separately. First, you figure out who has the fewest colonists in the colony. That player gets no points. Any players who have more colonists than the person with the fewest get points based on this scale. Each player compares their number of colonists to the fewest number, so purple scores 6 points and white gets 10.
Whoever has the most points wins.
Now, with 9 rounds, it might sound like a very long game, but each player's only taking 2 actions a round, so it moves pretty fast.
Unless there's someone who has a little bit of trouble deciding what their turns are going to be. Hey. So it could be that you're like, okay, I want to use this die to move, and then this one for the action, which is going to leave me with these 2 dice next turn, but I actually don't want to go to any of the locations that those dice can take me to, so maybe I want to rethink what I want to do on my first turn and do something instead.
And you're trying to decide if it's worth taking that specific action with a die. So maybe you're at GO and you have a blue 3. Well, you're going to get a resource and a point for that. But you have a black 5, so maybe instead of getting that point, you get 2 resources.
And then there's also the player mats that each have specific powers on them, so those could influence your decisions too. Each mat gives the player 2 unique abilities. One ability gives a bonus resource when you collect from a certain region. The other ability on the mats is more varied. There are things like your black die acts as a value 6 when you collect materials, or you can move your ship counterclockwise when you use your black die. Or you can use 2 matching materials as any material when you take a pod.
Now the rules for the game are the same whether 2, 3, or 4 players. The roll del aspect felt the same at those different player counts because your ship can be on the same locations as other ships throughout the game, but it felt different with those pods on all the different colonies.
I agree. In a 4-player game, you're putting out a lot more than in a 2-player game. It's filling up faster. And in those later rounds, it can actually get pretty crowded in the colonies. You might even have a situation where you can't place a certain color pod in one of the colonies. Maybe I want to place a yellow one, but in one of the colonies, there aren't any available places that aren't already next to 3 yellow, and it would break the rules to put another one in there.
In our 4-player games, we had one friend who thought one player was getting super lucky with what pods were becoming available. I mean, you can really move up those influence tracks, especially if you can get like a value 3 pod and put it with 2 others of the same color. I mean, you can move like 6 points.
But you still have to have the right dice to move on to the location and then the resources to take the pod and place it. So it's not pure luck. There's some skill there, and I think people maybe need to be careful not to set up another player for this awesome turn.
The art and illustrations are pretty basic and serviceable. I would say they're in line with other Rio Grande Games products, but nowadays so many other publishers are upping the quality of art and components. I mean, look at the player mats and the cycle cards. They're pretty thin, and compare this punch board from another game to the pods from Beta Colony. You can tell the difference. The punch board has a better quality to it, and it seems more durable to me.
I like the amount of choices in the game. The mechanics of what you do on your turn are pretty simple. They're not complicated, but there are a lot of things to consider when you're making choices, because there are definitely some trade-offs. Just placing pods, for example. What am I trying to do? Do I want to move up an influence track to get some of those rewards? Or am I trying to meet the requirements of one of the cycle cards or my achievement card? Or maybe I'm thinking about the majority scoring at the end of the game.
I think the majority scoring is one of the main sources of player interaction, because not only will it affect your own score at the end of the game, but it's going to affect other players' scores too. And of course there's the indirect interaction too, like things like taking pods that other people might want, or even those achievement cards. So I might see an achievement card that might really help Melissa, but I take it for myself instead.
But you can only have 2 achievements during the game, so you need to be careful that that card is actually going to help you as well, and you're not just doing it to spite the other player. Now, I enjoy replayability in my games, especially variability in the setups, and I think this game does a decent job with that. There's going to be randomized cycle cards each game. There's also the different player mats with different player powers, and then the pods are going to come out in a random order each time. Now, the achievements, though, I wish there was a little bit more variability there. The same statues come out every game, so you know what those bonuses are going to be. The buildings, they are stacked on top of each other in a random order, but it's always the
Maybe
same
more,
cards.
yeah.
So I would have liked to see maybe more achievements and have a random assortment put in each game.
The game design's very good, and I personally enjoyed the mechanics in the game, but I would say the theme is like barely there. I would have appreciated better quality components, like put it up a couple notches, and maybe even different components would have helped, because I think that would have helped tie the theme in a little bit more in the game. But we've really enjoyed playing the game, and our game group has even asked to play it again. So if this sounds like something you would enjoy, then check out Beta Colony from Rio Grande Games, and we'd love for you to subscribe to Tantrum House.
Amazing! Oh, not amazing.